am interested in what's happening in the UK. I spent a lot of time in Paris, and across the channel, the French were saying, okay, this is fine, now we can get along with Germany and do something in the EU. So, but what is your...
Sorry? Vowels, yes. Like exactly.
Good morning, everyone. Chairman, with your permission. I think Chairman is busy. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, should we begin the proceedings? I think we are waiting for Secretary Parmeswaran Iyer, but he should be joining us shortly. But a warm welcome to everyone. Mr. Chairman, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Mr. Pete Walls, Director, Asia, Caribbean, Overseas Territories of DFID, Secretary Iyer in absentia yet, Ambassador Manoj Bharti, who is recently joined as Additional Secretary, Economic Development and States in the Ministry of External Affairs, DG Sachin Chaturvedi, Mr. Gavin, DFID Head, and all the dignitaries present here. It's a great pleasure welcoming you to this momentous occasion, let's put it this way. Of course, this has been built into part of the ITEC training program also, but we are very happy that such a high-level delegation from UK could come. We have been working with the British High Commission here and the DFID office on a concept on development. We were struggling with what name and shape to give it, so we decided that we will try and call it a Global Development Center. But today, what we would do is we would launch a joint initiative, and that is what we have gathered together, to launch a joint initiative on global development with, of course, India and UK going together. And of course, we envisage this as an open platform which will bring in bigger partners to join us. We hopefully, of course, we have very high ambitions. We want to actually start an international center on global development. Of course, we will have to have experts from all around the world if it has to be global, obviously. So we are looking at working towards it slowly. Initially, we would start with a core group of people who will put together this entire team of an international advisory group. Then, of course, a management committee, which will be perhaps, since it is housed in RIS, we will give this additional responsibility, I guess, to our DG initially till we can actually really bring this up as a credible center and then let it off as an independent body. We, of course, are very encouraged by the establishment of the International Solar Alliance in India, and we hope that this will be the second international body that will be headquartered in Delhi. And thanks to our partners in the UK and DFID for so both trusting RIS and, of course, joining hands in this great initiative. We feel that development, that India, of course, there are difficulties, but there's one story that India could share with the world is basically on development, on what we have been able to achieve. Of course, there are people who still feel that the glass is only half full, but there are other glasses which are less than half full, let's put it this way. So I guess there's something that we can both put out as an example, but importantly, we can also learn from global best practices and see how the entire world which has committed to the SDGs, how we accelerate the developmental process through this sharing of experiences. So with these words, let me invite our chairman, Dr. Mohan Kumar, to give his opening address. So thank you all for coming. And yes, all the speakers, if they prefer, they could speak straight from the podium there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amar. I think it's very fitting that Ambassador Amar Sinha opened this meeting. He has been indefatigable in his efforts, working with the British High Commission here and the DFID, so I should give him entire credit for what is happening today. It's a very proud moment for RIS. I believe that RIS is best positioned to deal with something like this. I think my colleague, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, is going to make a detailed presentation on what this entails. So I will just confine myself to a couple of remarks. And those are conundrums as far as I'm concerned, and I hope when the Global Development Center comes into being, it'll be able to deal with some of these tough questions. The fact of the matter is that one big trend that I see is while inequalities between countries has declined over time, inequalities within countries has increased exponentially. And that is, I think, the root cause of what we are seeing now in terms of populism and so on. The other thing that I want to put forward as a proposition is that those of us who did trade, and I'm prejudiced because I spent 10 years in Geneva as India's negotiator with first the GATT and then WTO, we were absolutely not brainwashed, but we were convinced when we were negotiators that when it comes to trade and development, a rising tide will lift all boats, you know. We were absolutely convinced that there would be no people left behind, there would be no losers. What has happened through the process of globalization, I dare say, is that there have been significant losers. And that's what you're seeing now. The part of the protest that you're seeing in France, the election of President Trump, Brexit, if I may be allowed to say so, immigration being particular, but there are other reasons as well. So now, if there are a few people who are being left behind, the governments can do something by way of regulation. But if we are reaching a point where countries are split down the middle and you have an equal number of people who gain from development or from globalization, and an equal number of people who lose, and then the people who gain so much more than the people who lose, then you're bound to have tension, at least in democracies. I'm not talking of countries where, you know, these people don't have avenues to express themselves. So this is, it's a real problem, frankly. For those of us who deal with development and globalization, this is a real problem. Because, imagine reforming, if reforms, for example, in France, my favorite country, if reforms in France are difficult, which has got the best social safety net in the world, imagine reform in a place like India, where people don't have safety nets. What do you do with people who are left behind? And that's a huge, huge issue. My last point, which I think a center like this is ideally equipped to deal with, is the role of technology. I mean, technology can both enable and it can disrupt. But if it is going to be an enabling thing, you have to be super skilled in order to exploit it. But what about the people who are not skilled? And we have loads of those people in India. So, you know, technology, and not even going down the route of artificial intelligence, robotization, and the rest of it, but technology, I think, is also playing a huge factor in increasing inequalities, I suspect. And trade is getting the blame. This is the whole issue. Trade is getting the blame, actually, for what technology is doing. But that, again, is something that centers like this will have to deal with. So with those rambling remarks, it's a great pleasure to welcome Ms. Pete Wowles, Director. A great pleasure to welcome Mr. Gavin McIlvray. Sorry, your name is a bit of a... but a real warm welcome. Extremely grateful to DFID for supporting this. I cannot imagine a more appropriate organization supporting RIS in this. So I think it's a great marriage, arranged marriage, but lot of love. So let me conclude by extending a very warm welcome to you. And Sachin, you have the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for us to be with you on this, as Chairman very rightly mentioned, on a very profound occasion when we are trying to shape things as they have evolved in India and in other developing countries. He reflected the role of international orientation of countries, and last couple of decades we have seen how participation of developing countries has multiplied from 10% or 12% of their share of GDP coming from trade to 45%, 55%, and some of them even more. So what reflection that brings in on their development paradigm in terms of their in making what Chairman very rightly said, inclusive societies with their collective commitment on SDGs is important. I have a PowerPoint, so I would be presenting to you this idea of approach on global development initiative, as it is being called, as Ambassador Amar Sinha mentioned. It's an initiative with DFID, RIS, and we would soon be turning it into a global development center. What is the idea? What is the question? Why we require such a center? What purpose it would serve? Are some of the issues that I would be quickly presenting to you. Idea is also in terms of how we move forward on this, and I'm extremely grateful that we are joined in here by Mr. Manoj Bharti, who is looking after states and economic development, key portfolio in the Ministry of External Affairs, where he brings in the traction as Prime Minister's emphasis on making an inclusive society in the country and trying to bring the larger idea of bringing in all different parts, particularly the eastern region, connected as part of our Act East policy. So how we move forward, how we bring in Africa in our landscape, and as is being articulated time and again in terms of the extended neighborhood of India. So that's the focus we have. And in last couple of years, India has gone through some very interesting phase of development, which is important to be documented. And that's where we are going to move forward. So may I have my PowerPoint, please, on now, on all the three screens? Thank you. So the idea really is in terms of bringing and focusing on this new context, the shift for entitlement-based approach, which this government in 2014 has emphasized. And I think in last couple of decades, India has achieved what the basic entitlement should bring in, and has been strengthened by each successive governments over the years. And we now find a major shift in terms of further building on these success stories by highlighting the point that in state of entitlement, we contribute in terms of expansion of entrepreneurial base. And with that emphasis, what you are trying to do are series of flagship programs that have been initiated, Startup India, Skill India, and many important initiatives where you do not make people dependent on the state, but you teach them how they contribute. So job creation and expansion of that scenario is important. And this phase is also seen after GST and demonetization. We have also seen how India has moved towards from unorganized economy to organized. And there are specific numbers on that, specific issues, as in the morning we discussed today, those of you who were there for the breakfast seminar, we discussed importance of financial inclusion, the Jan Dhan and a couple of other schemes, and how we grow with lesser carbon footprint. Climate change is a reality, and how we bring in our own specific processes, our own specific development interventions as part of this process. More importantly, as emerged in today morning's presentation, is localization. local strategy. And RIS has been emphasizing through our program on Sustainable Development Goals. My colleagues who are leading this program, we have Professor Amitabh Kundu, Professor James, Sabyasachi Saha. This team has been trying to see how localization of Sustainable Development Goals is important. And from that process, the idea of digitization, how that enables. And fortunately, we could get Professor K.J. Joseph, who is president of GlobalX and is leading the global agenda on innovation and development linkages and what role South plays in that. So these are some of the rationale which compelled us to think, and I'm so glad that we could find DFID ready to grasp this idea and bring in what Prime Minister has been emphasizing through Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, so collective effort and inclusive development, bringing in the very rationale of Sustainable Development Goals as part of the development strategy. The approach, of course, is as UN has been emphasizing on multidimensional poverty, and with Radhika and Niti, so UN and